In this video, we are going to be learning about API outline and resources. And in the next video, we are also going to be seeing how to build your own API. So let's just start with what the GTM API is. In the previous lesson about the API, we had already seen that it's a backdoor into your Google Tag Manager interface. So it's basically a programmatic interface that helps in automating certain tasks. Now, these tasks could include creating triggers in a workspace, or listing all the containers that are there in an account, or creating tags in the workspace, etc. etc. So, why do we actually need the GTM API? Why is it actually useful? So, for example, you have to update a single tag, across hundreds of containers. Like, it's the same tag, but you have to update it across hundreds of containers. So in the manual method, which is what we were doing before the API came into play, so in that method you would have to go to the Google Tag Manager interface firstly. Then you would have to open the container, open the tag, then make the changes, then save the tag and publish the container. Also, you would have to go to preview mode to test whether it works or not. Alright. Via, and you would have to do this 100 times over, because you have to do it in 100 containers, right? So this could be time consuming. Whereas if you use the API, you could just write a code which takes time to design. The code takes time to design, no doubt. But once it is written, you just have to execute it once, and no matter how many containers you have to update the tag into, you can do it with the same code. So here the time to design is very low, because you know which container to go to, which tag you want to change, all that information you know. So time to design is very low, but the time to execute is very very high, because it's 100 containers. Whereas here the time to design is high, because you have to write a code and you need to know what to put in, and accordingly you need to create the code, but the time to execute is very very low. Right. And why this is useful? Because let's say we want to update the same tag in 200 more containers. So the time to design and the time to execute for this one will be same, even if it's 200 more containers. But here, even though time to design will remain same, but the time to execute will increase by a lot. So this is one way where API can be useful, the automation of tasks. So then in the API, we have something called as method and resource objects. So when you're communicating with an API, you call one of its methods, which are the defined function calls that are there in the API. So these calls could be get, list, delete, create, etc. But you might wonder, how does it know which container or account to list, or which container or account to get, or where to create it? So you need to suppose you want to create a tag in a container, so you need to pass the container ID, uh, which is basically details about the instruction, right? So you need to pass the container ID as a parameter and say that, okay, this container, I want it to create in this container, or I want to list a container which is in this account. So in that case, you need to pass the account ID, that I want to see the containers in this account. And if the function call is successful, the value returned is called the resource object, which you can use to verify if your operation worked as intended or not. Then moving on, authentication. So the infrastructure of the API is that's divided into client libraries, which you can use to communicate with the API. And since you're dealing with accounts and containers that are linked to a Google account or Google ID, right, we need to authorize access for the API. So when you choose a library you want to work with, how it normally works, how Google API normally works is that you choose a library you want to work with, then you authorize request using the OAuth protocol, which has different types of authorizations involved. Then you authorize those requests, and they are counted against your Google platform quotas. And this is how it normally works, right? And GTM API also works the same. Then coming to the design flow, once you're done with the authorization, you of course when you're creating something you need to authorize yourself that, yeah, I have permissions to create, edit or list. Then once you're done with that, the process while writing the code is hierarchical. So firstly you need to mention which account you need to go to, and within that account what containers. You can have multiple containers, so which container do you want to go to, and inside that container also you could have multiple workspaces. So you need to define which workspace you want to go to, and then you can get on with creating your tags, triggers in that workspace. So it's fairly hierarchical. Now coming to the uh, Google Tag Manager guide, the API guide, you can see it says that Google Tag Manager API provides access to Google Tag Manager configuration data for an authorized user. So again, we saw this in the previous video as well. It's just a backdoor into the Google Tag Manager interface. Alright, now it shows what all you can manage: accounts, containers, destinations, all of this. Alright, now if you go to reference, it actually shows you how to do that, and you can test it out as well. Right, now let's say I want to go to containers list. Firstly, let's say I want to get a list of what Google Tag Manager accounts I have linked to my Google ID. Right, then these are optional. You can further refine your search, include Google tags true or false. You can find, yeah, the parameter name, include Google tags, and retrieve accounts associated with Google tag when true if you set it to true. These are optional, so I'll just run it, execute. It will ask you for authorization. Then you need to select the ID for which you want the accounts. So what all accounts you have linked to that Google ID, they'll be shown here. So as you can see, these are the accounts, the Google Tag Manager accounts that I have linked to the ID that I selected. Now suppose I want to see what all containers are there in this account. So let's say I copy the path of the account. Alright, because we saw earlier we need to pass parameters. We need to pass account ID as a parameter. If I want to get the list of containers, I need to mention that in which account do I want the containers for. So let's say I go to list here, parent. This is not optional, this is where you have to enter the accounts API path. So we copied this, right? Now I'll paste it here, and again page token is optional, so I'll skip that, execute. Again it needs authorization. So in our test2 account, this is the container that we have, and we can verify it by going to Google Tag Manager and test2. You can see this is the container that we have. Right, now suppose I want to get the workspaces that are in this container. So again I'll copy the path, and we saw it's a hierarchical process. So firstly we need to mention inside which account, and inside that which container do we need the workspaces for. So I'll copy this whole path, and I'll go to workspaces and list. So again I'll paste it here, and this is optional, so I'll leave it. So here we can see that we only have one workspace, which is called default workspace. Again we can verify this by going here. I only have one workspace, which is the default workspace. So now for suppose you want to create a tag or a trigger. Let's say we want to create a trigger. So we go to create triggers. Again you need to enter the workspace ID as a parameter. So you can see here, you need to enter the path. Firstly the account in which the account ID, then containers, in which the container ID, then workspaces, in which the workspace ID. So it knows that I need to create the trigger in this workspace, which is in this container, and that container is in this account. So for that, I'll just copy this, copy it from here. You can see accounts, then the account ID, then containers, then the container ID, workspaces, then the workspace ID. I'll copy all of this, just paste it here. So trigger, suppose I want to create an all click trigger, right? Click. Now I want it, I can further refine it to some clicks, but I want an all click trigger, so I'll just execute it. You can see OAuth2 authorization, and we'll select the account. And this 200 code means that it was successful, right? Now we can see that trigger ID 111, name all click, type all click, type click. Okay, now if you go to verify it, yeah, an all click trigger which was added a few seconds ago. So this is how you can perform various tasks using the API, and this is a good way to test things by coming to the reference section of the API guide. Similarly, you could do more things as well. You could create tags, templates, anything you want, just how we created triggers. And if you want to, as I said, if you wanted to further refine it, you could check validation, you could set all these different things and further refine the trigger that you're creating, or anything that even if you create tags, you can perform further refinement in them. So this is how you can use Google Tag Manager's API to its fullest. And we saw what the API is. It's just a programmatic interface that allows you to automate certain tasks that you would otherwise have to do manually. And yeah, we saw how it works, why it can be useful in cases of multiple containers. That was one example. And then we saw the method and resource object, we saw the authorization and the design flow as well. That firstly you need to mention the account, and in that you have to mention the container, and in that you have to mention the workspace, and after that you need to create the trigger or tag or whatever you want to create. So yeah, this was all about the API outline and resources. Now in the next video we'll see how to build a API tool of our own. Thank you for watching this.